In the words of the late George Carlin, BS is the glue that binds us together as a nation. Here comes a ton of it. It's time for BSing with Big Nate.
Welcome into another edition of BSing with Big Nate. I was about to say I'm BS, but I'm actually Big Nate. We're bringing the BS today. Joined for this lovely edition by former host of my actual slot on the Bear, Mr. Rudy. How you doing, Rudy?
Doing well. It's been a long time since we talked, and I think the last time we saw each other, we were infiltrating a Donald Trump rally. So it's good to see you again.
That's the last big thing we did. I do remember that. It's good to see you again as well. What have you been up to since you left the New River Valley?
Well, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and I've been still working in radio, working in sports radio for the past 4 years, and had a couple other jobs in the music industry. Right now, working in licensing, royalties with VMI.
That's pretty awesome. We're going to start. I'm going to start by asking you about the radio, because I've noticed, at least in my capacity, everything's kind of shifted around, and I'm doing a lot of what I do from home. Are you running into the same thing, or is are your studios still pretty much operating? We just keep distance.
Yeah. So everyone that's on the air is working from home, and all the producers are in studio. And I'm producing. I'm not on the air at all with the sports station. So if I'm doing a show, I'll go in, and I'm pretty much the only one in the studio. And there's a lot more local programming on this station, and that's caused a lot more of a, I don't know, it's not as easy to work from home, but they've worked it out. Everyone's on Skype pretty much.
Skype and Zoom have been lifesavers throughout all of this. I've gotten very familiar. It's funny, all my life, all throughout college, not really into the Skype, the video conferencing thing, and now it's become, I can't go a day without hopping on Zoom or Skype and talking to someone. So thank God for the internet. The reason I brought you on today is a couple weeks back I did sports movies with Tim Donnelly, and your name actually came up because you can't do a list of sports movies without mentioning Rudy. So I figured, hey, wait a minute. Who's someone I always talked movies with and would have a good list of quarantine movies? So here we are. I've got Rudy with us, and we're going to talk quarantine movies. I tasked you earlier this week with coming up with 10, and I came up with 10. And let's get this shindig going. Let's talk about our movies. Well, when you see your list, were they in order, any particular order? Or is it just that's what you had?
Mine is in I think descending order of what I sent you. So the top is number 1.
10 through 1. Top is number 1? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, mine's the same way. So let's go ahead and we'll just do, you'll give your 10th, I'll give my 10th, 9th, and we'll go sequentially that way. So without further ado.
Before we start, I got to say, I think I misunderstood your instructions on top 10 quarantine movies. So I took that as best movies to watch while you're in quarantine. And then as I was watching some of yours, I was like, does he mean best movies that are about quarantines?
No, my list kind of turned out that way. I kind of went for a particular move, but no, you absolutely understood. And going through your list, you kind of hit the same mood I did with quite a few of those, just in a different capacity. But
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about how people what they would want to watch during quarantine, because it's like, do you want to watch someone else being quarantined? Are you a masochist, or would you rather, like watch something with a giant cast?
And, looking at my list, it's like none of them are reassuring. I can tell you for a fact, there's not a single one on that list where you come out with a good feeling, whereas yours has several that are A, fun to watch, and B, don't necessarily, they kind of offer that escape. So we'll start with your 10th.
Okay, so I chose Miami Connection. I don't know how well known this movie is to a general audience, but it's one of those midnight movies that gained popularity long after its release. It's a so bad it's good is what we call it, so it's in the category of The Room, Samurai Cop, Troll 2, those kind of movies. It came out in the late 80s, got panned by critics. This karate black belt, no, he's Taekwondo black belt guy, produced the whole thing. Somebody found it, an Alamo Drafthouse programmer in 2009, which I'm not sure. They're a bigger chain now. I'm not sure if in 2009 maybe that was the only one, but he found the print online for like $30, bought it off eBay, and it became a midnight movie there and regained popularity like 25 years after it came out.
I love movies that have weird, like after the initial run success. I've got some notes on Miami Connection. I wrote Motorcycle Ninjas, enough said, you were right, so bad it's good, and let's learn Taekwondo. Because those are the major takeaways with that. But it's funny, Alamo definitely, my first experience with an Alamo Drafthouse was probably in 2012, 2013. Have you seen Cheap Thrills with David Koechner?
Yeah.
Oh, so the concept behind Cheap Thrills, it's definitely one of those like midnight movies, but David Koechner plays this rich guy who meets this guy who's really desperate for money in a bar, and he just, come to my house, come hang out, we'll get you some money, and just starts having him do all these ridiculous things, and it just goes way overboard. What lines are you willing to cross to make money? And that was my first Alamo Drafthouse experience, and they did a whole premiere event where they actually had the director in for a Q&A afterwards, and they had like this challenge beforehand where members of the audience were doing what would you do, and they would give $100. Like one of them was it was called a suicide shot basically, and you have a tequila shot, salt, and lime, and you I think you squeezed the lime in your eye, snorted the salt, and then took the tequila shot. And I remember thinking, I wouldn't even do that for $100. And that's my Alamo Drafthouse story. But Miami Connection, definitely a fantastic number 10 watch. It's currently free on Vudu. If you're familiar with the Vudu service. That was where I ended up watching it. I was actually amazed at how many on your list. I didn't have to buy or rent a single movie. They were all available either on Amazon Prime, Netflix, Vudu. So, yeah, your list is probably a little more accessible than mine. I think there are a few on mine that I definitely had to go to my DVD collection with. But we're going to move on to my number 10, one of my favorite John Carpenter flicks. And I think, I know in your case there's at least one Carpenter, and I know I've got two on mine. He's going to show up quite a bit. But The Fog, the 1980 version of The Fog, easily one of my favorite horror movies, deals primarily with one of the main characters owning a radio station and a lighthouse, and then these monsters coming out of fog that you can't see. If you haven't seen The Fog 1980 and you've seen the remake that was in the early 2000s, you really need to do yourself a favor and go back and watch the original Fog. I think this was the first time you've seen it.
Yeah, it was. I really liked it. I've been on a little bit of a John Carpenter kick. I'm just kind of introducing myself to him as of recently. So when you sent me your list, I was like, oh, I'm definitely throwing in a John Carpenter. And this movie, to me, was interesting because I've always thought if I were to write a movie, which I never would, it's just you always think if you were to write a movie, if you're into movies, mine would be centered around a radio station and kind of using the radio station to call for help and to warn and that sort of thing. It would be a thriller. And of course, John Carpenter did it way better than what I had in my head, a decade before I was born.
Yeah.
I just hadn't found it.
I think, like you and I think there's definitely that we're looking for that shared relation. So I'm a sucker for any movie with a radio station. Play Misty for me. Another one that's coming up later on the list. Any movie involving a radio station, I'm almost always intrigued and tuned in. And I also find that I'm more willing to suspend disbelief on certain stuff just because I'm happy that radio is getting attention. But you definitely see some stuff. It's like, that's not how that's done. Didn't run into it so much with The Fog, mostly because it deals with a lot of off-air stuff. But one
thing about The Fog is is she just a one-woman show? Is she running the entire thing? I know she's the owner. She's also doing a show.
Yeah, the way I understand it is she kind of just runs that one-woman show, and then she talks to the weather guy. But it seems as if it's just her, because this was the days before automation was really widespread. So
Yeah.
I would assume she probably just jukeboxed quite a bit of the day, and then she was in for her show or whatever.
Well, she
And
was in pretty late at the beginning, and then later she was coming in first thing in the morning.
her
I don't
air
know.
show,
It's an AM
whenever the
station.
hell
I
she
know with
feels.
AM, maybe she went off the air during the evening hours. But,
That's possible. There's definitely a lot of threads to pull with that.
and how incredible is a lighthouse radio station? I would love to work in that.
Literally, before I saw that movie, I didn't really have any life aspirations to purchase or own a radio station. But the first time I saw that, I was like, you know what? Lighthouse would be cool. The Space Needle in Seattle would be even cooler. Just like buy the Space Needle, put a radio
Might be a little
station.
more
up
expensive.
there. Oh, I imagine no radio station could afford it. There's a fun fact about the Space Needle. Seems like a perfect place for a radio tower, but the company that owns the Space Needle won't allow anyone to put one up there. So they all have to go on the lower locations. That's my Space Needle story for the day. What was your number 9?
Number 9 is my John Carpenter, Escape from New York. I guess if you want to relate it to the coronavirus situation, there are plenty of people trying to escape from New York. I know a lot of transplants going back home and staying with their parents while everything crazy is going on. But I mean, like I said, just not into a lot of John Carpenter movies other than Halloween up until recently. And I watched this and I thought, man, this is like the greatest concept. And I don't know if it's the best execution of a great concept. Like, I think it's perfect for a remake. I would love to see a remake. However, Kurt Russell was amazing in the movie. You got Lee Van Cleef in there in his older years. It's just really enjoyable. I guess to anyone that hasn't seen it, you've got Manhattan walled up. It's a prison, and all the worst prisoners are in there. And there's not guards inside. There's guards outside making sure no one escapes. But basically, they're running their own society. It's just anarchy in there. You got gangs, weird ones, crazy characters. And Snake Plissken, the main character, has to go and save the president who crash landed inside of the prison.
Played by Dr. Loomis, Mr. Donald Pleasance himself. He, from my understanding, his involvement with John Carpenter came about completely from his daughter. Like, he had no idea, was not a fan of horror movies, said no. And then he ended up working in Halloween as Loomis because he was trying to curry favor with his daughter. But great choice for the president. Have a good playing president.
Speaking of presidents, Gerald Ford is in the movie. On the plane, he's trying to get into the cockpit that's been taken over. That's what happens. That's why they wreck. I think there's terrorists that wrecked the plane, but interesting cameo there. I think he was trying to be an actor at some point. But also, if you're not familiar with this movie, it's not your typical, I guess it could be. I mean, there's non-horror movies that he makes, John Carpenter. This one's not a horror movie. It's more of an action movie. And there's some cheese in there and stuff like that. And it's aged a little bit. But if you're able to kind of put yourself in the context of when it came out, and also if you're someone who can appreciate stretching a budget the way that he does, he uses a lot of animation, a lot of, matte paintings to make locations look bigger. And he shot actually the movie in St. Louis, in a burned down area of St. Louis that they just let him shoot there because, that was the location that worked.
Escape from New York's one of those ones. It's part of what I like to call the holy triumvirate of post-apocalyptic gang warfare movies. Of course, you've got that. You've got The Road Warrior. And while it's not necessarily post-apocalyptic, it does very much deal with the gang warfare aspect, is The Warriors, which also takes place in New York as they're trying to get back to New Jersey. And I think that they all came out around the same period, and you do find them stretching those budgets, but you also find like a lot of it relies just on sheer storytelling. And Escape from New York's definitely one of my favorite Carpenter flicks. Of course, it didn't make my list, but I did almost put The Road Warrior on there because kind of a similar vibe. Of course, Road Warrior was stylized a little differently, Escape from New York's a little darker.
Where do you
Whereas a lot
fall on? Which one do you think is better, Escape from New York or Escape from LA?
Oh, I mean, you have Snake Plissken surfing down La Cienega. It's a little ridiculous. So, I mean, I have to go with Escape from New York.
Is that intentionally ridiculous, or is
With
that? Because
LA,
also
I really think it was intentionally ridiculous. From my understanding, I could be entirely wrong. I think they were making it to like be shown on TV. Like originally, it was framed as a TV series following Snake Plissken, and then they just turned it into a movie, and it definitely ups the cheese factor. It's not the finest film in the catalog.
the basketball scene was not my favorite sports scene in a movie.
No. So we're gonna go to my number 9. I didn't feel like you could make a list without Castaway. Because, I mean, it's the classic isolation flick, but also you've got Tom Hanks establishing himself as one of the biggest talents in Hollywood with arguably the strangest supporting actor ever in a volleyball. I mean, you can't go wrong with a little Wilson action. And if it's first of all, it's bright, so it's something you could watch during the day. A lot of it takes place during the day, but if you can sit through him taking care of that tooth with an ice skate, you can survive just about anything.
That's one of the
Also,
cringiest
FedEx
scenes
getting some love.
in a movie. Oh yeah, FedEx.
FedEx getting some love, and I'm sure right now they're taking all the love they can get because their jobs surely become nightmares throughout all of this. But yeah, Castaway definitely coming in at my number 9 as an easy choice. I know. I was actually surprised. You're a big Tom Hanks fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's definitely a hole in my movie watching from early Tom Hanks. But I would say probably this is my first big Tom Hanks experience. I think, what was this, 2003, 2001?
I was a 3.
Yeah, I mean, there was Saving Private Ryan, a couple others, but really this is where I kind of fell in love with Tom Hanks. I mean, everyone has their Tom Hanks movie where they fall in love with him. It's also where I fell in love with these kind of survival isolation movies. There's other ones like Life of Pi and The Martian that come after. It's also, you know, if you've ever watched Seinfeld, like the Chinese restaurant or the parking garage episodes where they all take place within one setting. I just love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And I do see that, again, we're going to touch on it later on your list. You've got several survival flicks on here that just really resonate and hit a place with me that Castaway, honestly, looking at your list and comparing it to mine, if we're putting Castaway, there are other movies I should have hit that I think you hit the nail on, but that whole concept of, and I think I was first introduced to it with Alive, the one about the Uruguayan soccer team that ended up crashing in the Andes.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember always thinking that, like, those are the most compelling stories, is what you're willing to do to survive and keep going. And I think while it may seem depressing and like you said, masochistic, there's definitely an element of hope introduced in my opinion with it.
Yeah, depending on which one you're watching. You know, if you're watching like Everest or something, maybe.
It's true. So your 8th pick, what do we got?
This one is, I guess, my prestige pick. This is The Last Emperor, late 80s film from Bernardo Bertolucci. It's about the last emperor of China. I think his name is Puyi.
Puyi.
And when he's born, he's just worshipped like a god. There's a scene where some elders, I guess, have him use the bathroom in a chamber pot and kind of judge his diet based on that. And did you watch this one, by the way?
Yeah, it's kind of a heavy watch.
It is. It's a slow burn. It's an epic kind of in the way that like a Lawrence of Arabia or a Ben-Hur is, where you got this big chunk of history they're trying to show and the lifespan of their main character. It's definitely homework for a lot of it, but to me, the ending is what pays it off. You know, if you want to make connections to our current situation, I'll let you do that. But as far as the isolation goes, he's the ruler of Manchuria or whatever. I don't know my Chinese history well enough, but the transition between imperialism and communist China happens within the movie, and he becomes just a figurehead and a political pawn. And on top of that, he's the emperor, so he's not allowed to leave the Forbidden Kingdom. How much power does he really have? It's interesting.
Well, it's just so tragic because he's so young when he finds out he's emperor, and then like the whole just going from being somebody to being nobody, that fall from grace is really depressing. I think they did a good job grabbing, because it is a large chunk of history. I think it's like 60 years that they end up grabbing and covering it. It's very compelling viewing. I think it earns I think got like 9 nominations for Academy Awards. I think it definitely earns. I think it's fantastic. Definitely a heavy watch though. That's one you want to watch in the middle of the day when you're wide awake and you're looking to learn something. Because I think there's a lot to be taken away there. It's not what I would call a fun watch. Like, I'm not going to sit down and watch it. You know what would be fun today? Kind of like The Lord of the Rings. Not really a fun watch, but it's a compelling story. And you really almost, like you said, it's homework. You got to work for it. But I think at the end, you come away with a real appreciation for both the art form that's portrayed, but also the Chinese history associated with it. Because I mean, there's some wild concepts going on there. The fact that basically a toddler can be an emperor is shocking. And of course, you've got that whole rise of communism. And it's really not that far back in history. He died in like 1967.
Yeah, this is the early 1900s that most of this is going on. And just as far as length goes, that's another reason I chose it. If you really need to kill some time, if you're super bored and you're like, you know what? It's time to get caught up in my homework movies. This is one that you should get in there. And speaking of long epics, Peter O'Toole is in this as well.
Peter O'Toole. I find myself being hit or miss on Peter O'Toole. I always catch him in stuff, and the man was fantastic. But did he or did he not play James Bond at one point? In a non-Broccoli Films version of James Bond, and wasn't it just horrible? Or maybe I'm confusing him with someone.
Are you talking about the old? The
original
Casino Royale was the.
So I'm realizing now as I say this, Peter O'Toole is not Peter Sellers, and it was Peter Sellers who's in Casino Royale. Peter O'Toole, as far as I understand it, can do no wrong. So I'm going to apologize for that one. You can give me a tongue lashing if you feel the need. But,
not that old, you know. We're bound to make some of these mistakes every once in a while. No, we're talking about Peter O'Toole from Lawrence of Arabia, and I guess he was in Troy in 2004. I don't remember that. I saw that movie, but
I watched Troy. So I was sitting at the Macadoo's on a Bear Cave Sunday, and for whatever reason, I was in front of one of the TVs that like didn't get switched to a game. So I watched Troy on a Sunday, completely reading it in subtitles, and I was thinking, man, maybe I should watch this movie because it seemed really intriguing. And of course, it was edited for television, so I'm sure there was a lot I missed, but still haven't gone back and done it. Maybe that's one I should add to my to-do list.
I saw that in theaters when it came out because I was taking Latin in middle school, and they offered extra credit if we went to go see Troy. And looking back on it, it's pretty insane what Brad Pitt was doing with his body back then, because this, Snatch, and Fight Club are all different body types coming out around the same time. He must have been really going through some crazy diets and exercise.
I didn't even consider that because, yeah, I mean, Fight Club, he's super lean and basically all muscle and grit. Snatch, he kind of had a – yeah, that's wild. I didn't even consider the weight fluctuation there. We're gonna move along to my number 8 because, I mean, Kurt Russell, The Thing, John Carpenter. Holy crap. This is the first one that really touches on this in my list, but a big thing for me with movies when you're isolated is just a big thing being a person who's isolated is the paranoia kind of rises within you. And something that I think parallels that is the concept of The Thing, where you're in this Arctic base camp, or, well, basically working on a science expedition, and an alien comes down from space, and you don't know who the hell has the alien and who does it, but it's also some of the best special effects ever in a movie. I think it really paved the way for a lot of groundbreaking monsters in movies.
Yeah. So is this the sort of the Godfather of, you know, like Werewolf in London and Fright Night and that sort of thing?
I think so.
As far as makeup effects go.
I also call it like the greatest body horror ever invented, because I mean, to a certain extent, you don't know who's gonna freak out and transform into some crazy spider monster, and I think Alien does that a lot too, because I mean, you initially got that first like chest burst. I like the concept of the monsters right there with you. You just don't know who it is. But I definitely think that the Alien and the Thing are the precursors to a lot of those moves.
Yeah. Do you know, how does this budget compare to the other ones? Because I don't know how much those makeup effects cost, but it had to be up there. Plus, he's using a set rather than shooting on location here.
The Thing came out in '87, so by that I think it was '87, might have been '83.
So he's probably
by that
more
point,
established at that point.
Yeah, as I said, by that point he's got a lot more. The theaters are based, or not the theaters, the film distribution, the production companies are willing to throw money at him because he's established. He's had Halloween, he's had The Thing, or not The Thing. Good lordy, that's a hell of a brain fart. He's had The Fog and Halloween, so I mean he's established himself, and I'd be willing to bet there was some money thrown at that. They spared no. I mean, I remember the one spider monster with like the human head. It just still to this day makes my skin crawl how unnatural but also natural it looks. Granted, you do have to go back with a grain of salt. They weren't using CGI; these are practical effects, and I think with what they did there, they definitely spent their budget wisely. We're still talking about it all these years later.
Yeah, there's been a lot of copycats. Of course, that was a remake already, but
yeah.
Do you remember that the X-Files episode that was basically The Thing, the entire episode?
Yeah, I never made it all the way through X-Files. Was this one of the early seasons?
Yeah, I think so, because I didn't make it. I didn't make it very far through the X-Files either. But
the ones of the X-Files that stand out to me are the one with the monster that's living in the sewers with the weird-looking face, and then the family of like inbred cannibals. Those are the only two I really remember. Mm-hmm. I know the one with the like inbred cannibals was called Home, and I couldn't tell you the other one. For all I know, I could be combining two episodes. Or I could be separating one episode into two, rather.
Yeah, I don't remember enough about X-Files to get into a deep discussion, but I do remember that episode was. I mean, they pretty much admitted like we're just ripping off The Thing here, but not nearly as good makeup effects.
I like the Monster of the Week concept of the X-Files, but once they start getting into the conspiracy theory and like the longer story arcs, actually where I kind of started to tune out. I preferred Mulder and Scully just traveling around the country and trying to find these monsters, and it was a different monster every week. I don't know. That's where I fall on the X-Files. Let's proceed to your seventh.
Yep, seventh. I went with the Big Chill here. Also, your audio just dropped out there, I think. But I'll keep going. The Big Chill is also from the '80s. It's crazy. I'm picking a lot of '80s movies so far. I've never been especially enamored by the '80s, at least growing up. I have been recently, and I've always loved new wave music. But this one is for the people who are not into watching isolated individuals while they're also isolated in quarantine, because it's kind of just one of those hangout movies. You just relax and hang out with these characters and go through some poignant late. It's a coming of age story for people in their late 20s or early 30s, however old they are. And I didn't rewatch this one. I haven't watched it in a while, but that's the reason I chose it. You got Jeff Goldblum in there, I believe. What's her face? Hang on. Let me pull up the cast real quick. And Nate, I think you're your audio is still out.
No, I'm here. I mean, I assume I'm here.
Yeah,
It didn't drop. I was just waiting for you to pull up. Because
Glenn Close is the person I'm thinking of. But there's other people in there that you might be more familiar with if you're an 80s connoisseur. But what happens in this movie is a friend dies. You have the iconic funeral scene with the Rolling Stones playing. A bunch of friends get together after not seeing each other for a long time, and then just hash out all these old conflicts and romances and all sorts of things. And they're in a house staying together. So,
to me, because I saw Grown Ups before I saw The Big Chill, but it's a more adult version of Grown Ups. Kind of, I mean,
is that right?
I would not be surprised to find out that Sandler watched The Big Chill and was like, hold on, let's add kids to this. Because you've definitely got a lot of the and I love stories like this where it's just, you've got such a shared history. Everyone's coming in, and then throughout the entire tale, you're learning that shared history, and things that have been buried come back up. I think that's a great storytelling method. And, I mean, it is great. This is the first time I had seen it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would definitely give it the same seal of approval and recommendation. And you can't go wrong with Goldblum.
No, and you've also got Tom Berenger in there and William Hurt, Kevin Kline, just to throw some more cast members in there. But if you're someone who has to have a plot, I would say maybe I don't recommend it. If you saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and you were like, "Where's the plot here?" Then maybe you're not going to enjoy this one because they're hanging. If you don't like Cameron Crowe movies, maybe you don't like this one. But to me, it's fascinating and it's profound.
Apparently, Costner was the one who killed himself, and they cut his
really?
both, if not all. But yeah, apparently it was Costner who was playing the dead guy. So
it's too bad for him.
Well, I don't know if he still got credited. I didn't pay enough attention. That was more research for note taking after the fact. But yeah, definitely The Big Chill worth a watch. And here we're gonna go real dark and claustrophobic. Even if you don't like monsters, feeling claustrophobic, or caving, this one might not be for you. But The Descent, easily one of the most unsettling movies I have ever seen, coming in at my number 7. I didn't realize I was actually as claustrophobic as I am until I saw that movie. Like, it actually genuinely made me realize some things. Oh, so that's why I have a problem with tight spaces, because the whole movie taking place within this cave, and you can't see these monsters. So you've got to deal with the dangers of a cave you've never explored. You've got to deal with these monsters who live in the cave. And I just think it's a great, simultaneously an exploration but an isolation flick. And had you seen The Descent before now?
No, I hadn't, and that's probably maybe The Fog is my favorite new one that I've watched from your list, but The Descent is also, it's second, if not tied with that, because it works on multiple levels, however you want to watch it. If you want to be really engaged with the overtones of going through tragedy and spiraling into emotional chaos and then coming out the other side, it works on that level. It also works as one of the best creature features because you got what seemed like, I don't know, maybe, just your typical creature feature, but you throw it into a cave that's so confined. And I think it's, 45 minutes before you see a monster?
Yeah.
But the scares start way before that because they're hanging over huge, I don't know if they're called crevasses in a cave, but huge drops, and they're in tight spaces. The first half of this movie, once you get past the introduction, is like 90% black television screen and then someone crawling through a hole with a flashlight, and it's unsettling.
It truly is. And I think that's if you have seen that one and you're like, okay, what's another one that would scratch a similar itch? Have you seen As Above, So Below?
No, I've heard of that, but I haven't watched it.
Similar concept, but in the catacombs in France.
Oh, wow.
Also definitely worth a watch. That would have fallen in my honorable mention. That comes after the 10, but definitely worth a watch if you like The Descent. As Above, So Below has a lot of that same feeling. It's also got the additional, like, with The Descent, you don't have the issue of a language barrier, but As Above, So Below throws that in because the main character doesn't speak French.
Oh,
So
nice.
it gets even weirder, and definitely a fantastic watch. The Descent, that one of my favorite movies of all time.
That's
Coming
one where.
to
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, there's movies that have taken me longer to watch when it comes to horror, and I didn't really get into horror until my early 20s because I guess I remember seeing movies when I was younger than that, early teens or whatever, and being just really disturbed by when someone dies and being like, oh, great, what do their parents think? What are their grandparents going to think when they find out how this psycho destroyed their grandkid? I would think into it too much. Now I appreciate a good death. But there have been certain horror movies that have taken me longer to get to because of the reputation. And that would include The Exorcist. What's another one? Maybe The Grudge. Certain horror movies have an aura around them, so it takes me longer to get to them. And then, of course, it's just a movie once you finally watch it. But The Descent was one that was totally worth it.
Yeah, I'm glad you watched that. I'm glad. I didn't know you hadn't seen it before, so I'm glad I was able to point you in that direction because that's one of my favorites. But we're coming to one that I had forgotten existed until I saw it appear on your list. And I'm kind of ashamed that I forgot about it. You're number 6. Let's hear it.
Number 6 is Open Water. And this is an interesting one. It's divisive, I think, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to think back into the time when this was coming out. If you watch it now, it looks like a YouTube video that somebody made. But if you think about when it came out, and of course this movie came up through Sundance whenever it came out, 2003, I think. And, it was just primed for that, that model after the Blair Witch hype. But it's about two people, a couple that go on their trip to, I don't know, do you remember where they are? The Bahamas or something? Hawaii?
Yes.
I don't know.
Just generic island scene A.
Yeah, generic islands with sharks somewhere in the water. And they go out on a shark diving trip, and the head count is messed up, and they end up getting left. And they're out in the water, and I was really surprised at how tense this movie gets. Because everyone, I think, at this point knows the concept of the movie. It's two people in the water. There's sharks around. Where do you go? I mean, all hope is lost. But there's the, to me, iconic scene where he gets pulled under just for a second. The shark is kind of curious and gets a little taste, I guess, where he just kind of ducks under the water and comes right back up. And I was dreading that the entire time watching the movie, or at least when they were in the water. And it really worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most emotionally invested I've ever been in a shark-themed movie. But it's also, to me, one of the most devastating because, like, they were going on this whole trip to kind of repair a rift in their marriage and kind of fix some things, and kind of like a ancillary or like a secondary honeymoon. And man, it just does not go well. Also, never charter a shady trip to go scuba diving is my big takeaway from that, because
they didn't have Yelp back then.
I mean, you've got the whole, you get left behind on this scuba trip. You're in the water with sharks, and you have no idea whether or not you're going to be found, and they just try and survive that. And from my understanding of it, it's based on a true story. I don't know how specifically true it is, but it's a very believable concept. They're not throwing in anything that doesn't seem like it could happen, and I think that's what makes it so impactful, is that, holy crap, this could really happen. This probably has taken place at some point. And I think it's definitely a devastating watch, but it's a really good one. And I'm glad you put it on your list because, like I said, I had completely forgotten how amazing it was. Like you said, I mean, yeah, there's belief to be suspended disbelief to be suspended because the filming quality is not great. But a lot of that's captured.
It's like one of those handy cams that we used to have back in the early 2000s, late 90s, that we used when we were kids, that our parents
exactly. And I think they had a really low budget. Like I really truly do, and I think they did a great job with not a lot.
Yeah, and I think if you compare this to something like The Descent, in a lot of horror movies, there is some glimmer of hope that's given. In The Descent, you've got, okay, these monsters are blind, so they're only going to come after me if I make noise. There's some kind of way where the viewer can let go of a little tension because someone maybe not making noise on the screen or whatever the case is for whichever horror movie. And this one, you start racking your brain for, okay, what can they do? Should they swim in a certain direction? Are they going to be making too much, I guess, ruckus for sharks to be attracted to? And then on top of that, it's real. Like, it's totally plausible. And the true story was, well, I guess if you're afraid of spoilers, then I won't say, but whatever you could know from this being a true story, the basics were taken. And so, yeah, it's totally plausible.
I mean, it's definitely one of those where the basics would have had to have been taken, but
there's not a lot to it story-wise. It's a simple premise, and that's all you need. I don't think you need the go-ahead from the two people who were actually lost at sea.
It's definitely a movie that relies on a sense of dread to hook you.
Yeah, so you would probably have to either be watching it for the first time or have not seen it in a while to have the full effect, but you can still appreciate it.
No, it's a great watch. Moving along to my number 6. Full disclosure, this is a foreign film. If you, I mean, I guess, did you watch it with a dub or did you use subtitles?
Speaking of full disclosure, I could not find the Spanish version and had to sit through a terrible, terrible English dub. I saw your note on the list to watch it in Spanish, and I am a huge advocate of watching movies in their original language, even if it's like a Studio Ghibli movie or like Ip Man or something. I watch it in the original language with subtitles because it takes me like 2 minutes to get used to reading subtitles and watching a movie at the same time. But this one I couldn't find anywhere. So it was terrible. It was so bad. There's a lot of scenes with groups of people talking at the same time, and that's where it gets really entertaining. I think maybe it took away from my taking seriousness of the movie. And there's one part where an Asian woman is describing a fireman falling down a few flights of stairs, and that's hard to sit through.
My dad's the one who actually turned me on to this movie, and he very specifically said, watch it with the Spanish audio, English subtitles. Because I did. He showed me just like a clip of the dub, and I remember it being, oh, this is cheesy as hell. But with the actual like Spanish audio, if you watch it with the English subtitles, that's intriguing. I'm gonna have to find that. That was one I had in my DVD collection, so I had it on hand. But it's Wreck. I guess we kind of
I forgot we didn't say that.
The movie is Wreck, which deals with basically these first responders are called to a house with a woman who's basically just gone crazy. And they never directly say it, but it essentially operates like a zombie flick. You have these first responders in this building trying to deal with this and figure it all out. And the first one's pretty crazy. The franchise gets even weirder as it goes on. Eventually, I think by like the fourth one, turns out that the Pope's involved, and it's all a conspiracy that the Pope is spreading this virus. And really cheesy. It's a foreign film, so the cheese might be a little lost if you're not a Spanish speaker. But if you're watching with an English dub, apparently it gets pretty chaotic. But it's called Wreck. There was an American remake called Quarantine, which is pretty good. That's actually how my dad ended up finding it. Was he watched Quarantine, then pulled up the IMDb and was like, hey, wait, this is a remake. We got to watch the original. And Wreck has always stood out to me as one of the best found footage films because it's told completely through cameras that were on scene. I believe a news crew, they're using news crew footage, body cams, and stuff like that. And I think it tells a great story for it to be what's essentially a zombie flick, and they're not necessarily known for their great storytelling. I'm sorry you couldn't find the Spanish audio. I'll have to dig that up for you because it.
Yeah, there was an option to change audio language, but they only had the English available. I would like to see it in that. But that being said, I can sit through probably any found footage movie. It's something about, a lot of people don't like them, and it's a gimmick for some people, but even if it's a bad movie, I can sit through it. And then most of them I do enjoy. The Blair Witch is probably one of my favorite movies. You've got Chronicle is like a Superman, or not a Superman, but a superhero kind of found footage movie. That one's fine, but watchable. And Troll Hunter is one that's pretty fun.
I like Troll Hunter. See, for me, found footage, I don't think it's fair to call it a gimmick anymore, because look at how we as a society interact with the world. Everyone's got a cell phone in their hands. We're constantly documenting everything. So I honestly think as people, it's less of a gimmick and more of a reality. So, I mean, Blair Witch Project, obviously one of my favorite movies of all time, and was really the first. The second one suffers not from storytelling, but from the lack of being a found footage, in my opinion. They do have some aspects of the found footage in Blair Witch Project 2, Book of Shadows, but I think as a genre, it can only grow to be better. Have you seen VHS?
No, that's another one. VHS and Rec were like the ones that I needed to kind of cross off. And I'd like to know more about how the sequels go before I dive into the first one.
Gotcha.
But what I liked about Rec is, other than the found footage aspect, there is some originality as far as a zombie outbreak happening within just an apartment building.
Yeah, they never, in no other movie do they confine it like that. It's usually the problem, the spread. Whereas this is very much quarantined to one location.
Yeah, because I guess the conversation around zombie outbreaks is, where would you want to be? In a mall, in a, I don't know, like a restaurant or something, so you can feed yourself. Like, you got to think about those things. In this one, they don't get a choice.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Rec. Like I said, it's easily I would call it the best telling of a story using that found footage format. Blair Witch, of course, being one of the earliest and arguably the best, but I think from a storytelling standpoint, this one really works because, like you said, their originality with the story and the way it's all found and proceeds. The sequels, I don't recommend them so much.
The apartment that they use is really cool too. That was one of my biggest takeaways when they were going through specific apartments. I was like, man, that's a really nice apartment. It's one of those city apartments that's in a high rise, but it's old. Crown molding and all that.
All right, let's move along to your number 5.
Number 5, to get out of the horror genre a little bit, is Touching the Void, a documentary. This movie is from the early 2000s. It was an IMAX film, and it's only 3 people that are interviewed: the 2 climbers that are in the story, and then the 3rd guy that was down at their base camp. If you know how climbing tall mountains works, you have to acclimatize to the altitude, and he was the guy that wasn't their shaman or whatever, or what do you call it? It's not a shaman, it's a Sherpa, yeah, a Sherpa. But anyways,
I was planning a mountaineering expedition. I got a shaman, and well, we didn't get very far.
But anyways, these 2 guys, they go up the mountain. No one's ever climbed the face of this mountain before. They make it up pretty easily, and then on their way down, chaos ensues, and it gets pretty intense. The way that they recreate everything, because it's a docudrama, I guess, where you have the guys explaining it and then they recreate it as if it's a movie, which normally is not my favorite type of documentary, but here it works. And I don't know how they filmed. Like, there's a part where a guy falls into a crevasse, and I don't know how they got that on footage. Not that they got it on footage, but I don't know how they recreated it.
Stuntman died. It's the only explanation.
Yeah, I mean, the actor, they didn't have regulations back then. But yeah, again, it was shot in IMAX, so it's beautiful. Watch it, on as good of a TV as you can if you do.
That's when I saw. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's also it's got a cult following. for a documentary. That's kind of rare. It's just really intense.
That's one that I actually had the privilege of seeing in IMAX.
Oh wow, yeah, I'm jealous.
When I saw it on the list, I was like, that sounds really familiar, and then kind of went through and rewatched. That is familiar. I saw it in IMAX. I was always fascinated with mountain climbing, particularly like all of the failed Everest expeditions, and I don't know why. It's something like really dark, and it's purely stuff like this is purely in the expedition of vanity, just to say you've done something, and I find that an intriguing characteristic of the human spirit, and I think this is a great telling because you've got that. I mean, it's failed, but not as tragic as it could have been. And I think that's what makes it so compelling, and I think that's exactly why it became an IMAX and why it's garnered that cult following. Because very easily could have gone the other direction. I tend to agree with you on the style of retelling. Usually not my thing, but I mean you're absolutely right. It does work here because it's one of those things where it's something that a very few portion of the population could really identify and understand what's going on. So I think it's the most responsible way to tell that story. Because I feel like there's a legit concern that people could just hear them tell this and be like, I could do that, but you kind of capture that visual. So I think Touching the Void, definitely a solid choice. Definitely worth a watch if you happen to be loaded and own an IMAX theater.
You can buy them for $2 million private IMAX theater. I plan to eventually.
That's what I'm saving up for. I'm about 10% of the way there. Oh, God, no, I'm not, because 10% would be I'm not even 1% of the way there. Good God. Oh, that's depressing. But Touching the Void, definitely worth
working radio.
Yeah. Wonder if we can just finance that as a radio station. That would be cool. Probably not going to happen. Touching the Void, though, definitely worth watching. That was your number 5. My number 5 is a movie not to watch while eating popcorn. You want to watch it with fairly loud speakers on an HD screen, and don't let anyone else around you chew chips. It's A Quiet Place. Have you seen A Quiet Place?
I have seen A Quiet Place, and I saw it in the theater.
Yes. Okay. So watching that in the theaters is one of my favorite theater experiences because people were all around me. I remember them like they started the movie as everyone does in a movie theater. You got your snacks, and like there was almost a clear progression when everything got so quiet. Nobody was eating their snacks. It's like the first time I've really seen a bunch of people leave a movie theater with leftovers.
Well, I worked in a movie theater, and I've seen full buckets of popcorn in the trash so many times that it blows my mind. But yeah, I had a full bucket after that. I kept it because I planned to eat it. But it was kind of awkward. But yeah, I mean, it's just something rare that can happen in a theater viewing experience, that nothing changes about the physical atmosphere that you're going to see the movie in, unless you saw it in like IMAX or something like that. But just the way the movie was made, the concept of it, you've got everyone sitting there, like either chewing very slowly or just completely riveted by what's going on.
I remember being so compelled by the concept of a movie where for so long we were living in a silent film era. We're so excited for talkies, as they were called, and actually having actors speak on the screen, to go into that theater and being horrified and terrified anytime someone speaks or makes the smallest noise. And I also think that the fact that so if you haven't seen A Quiet Place, basically there are these monsters that hunt relying on sound. It was written by John Krasinski, directed by John Krasinski, his wife Emily Blunt's in it. Fantastic flick. Very quiet, but relies heavily on what sound is there. But that movie to me is just one of the most tense watches, to where even I like when you can get so enthralled into a movie that you feel like you're a part of it. And I remember thinking like, crap, we can't make any noise because the monsters are going to jump off the screen. And it's not even like a 3D movie. Tragically, as an ancillary note to that is A Quiet Place 2 was supposed to come out this month and ended up getting delayed thanks to the coronavirus. So now is as good a time as ever to revisit and watch A Quiet Place.
What is the last movie you saw in theaters? Out of curiosity.
Oh, geez. Not proud, but it was Adam's Family.
Oh, really? That's a while back.
Snoop Dogg playing cousin. Because we had a kid back in September, and you can't take a baby.
Oh, yeah. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. The last movie I saw that came out that I was really excited about and thrilled with was It Chapter 2. You want to take a side step? How did you feel about it?
I knew after the first movie that you couldn't make another movie as good as the first one, because part of the fun of that movie is that it's got that kind of Steven Spielberg group of kids thing to it. And I knew the second half was going to be adults, and it's just not as scary because you're not watching it through the eyes of kids. But I still, I thought it was fun. I thought it was a little repetitive, but pretty scary, very long.
Yeah, I couldn't quite pinpoint why I didn't like the second one as much, but I think you just accurately summed it all up. I didn't even think about that. There was that with the first one, does have that Spielberg feel, and kind of everyone can relate to that kid in the summer. But I will say this about the second one. Bill Hader, I think, needs to be in more dramatic roles. I think Bill Hader did a fantastic job with that character, and that was, I mean, I enjoyed the second one, but you're right, it wasn't as good as the first one. So that was our little sidestep on It Chapter 2. What's the last movie you saw in theaters?
Let's see. Check my. I have to make sure, because the last weekend we went to see movies, we saw 3. One per day for 3 consecutive days, and I believe it was the Ben Affleck movie where he's a basketball coach called.
Wait, what? I missed this entirely.
Yeah, so he's drawing from. I don't know if they're showing my tickets anymore. But I have AMC A-list, so you pay $20 a month and you scan, or you pick what movie you want to go see. You get 3 a week, and The Way Back is what it's called. So Ben Affleck, an old basketball player in high school, star basketball player, became an alcoholic, and this school gets him to coach their basketball team.
So knowing that it was the last movie you saw in theaters, are you satisfied with that choice?
Well, it was the only choice at the time, because before that we saw The Invisible Man, which was great. Did you see The Invisible Man?
Yes. We watched it a couple weekends back, because that was one of the ones that were, hey, it
got moved to VOD.
We're putting it on video on demand, and man, I loved The Invisible Man.
Yeah, they did a really good job.
I remember seeing the trailer, that it's intriguing that we want to go through this story again, but as far as remakes of that tale, I think it's the best one.
And Universal was trying to start that shared universe of the Universal monsters, and they did The Mummy with Tom Cruise, and they did, I don't know which other ones were tied into that specific universe, but it just failed every time they tried. But Frankenstein, I think they did the I, Frankenstein movie, but this one, I think Blumhouse was part of it, so they had a really low budget, made it really fascinating, and a lot of people want to see it.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed that from beginning to finish.